why green hydrogen and what we're trying to do with green hydrogen is a little bit more than just the production of the molecule. And I think this particular slide is up. So why is Namibia actually trying to champion, because really what we're trying to do is to incubate a new industry in Namibia. We're trying to incubate a synthetic fuels industry actually in Namibia. And I think one of the simplest ways to explain it is when you consider this speech that the president delivered in September 2020 at the United Nations General Assembly. Essentially, he delivered this speech about 6 months before we launched HPP2. And his ambition in this speech says that the president, of course working with the government and all of the Namibian citizens, had an ambition to transform the Namibian economy, right? The Namibian economy is primarily dependent on the primary sector. We dig up things from the ground and we sell them, whether it's uranium, gold, diamonds, etc. We don't manufacture too many things, that's a secondary sector. And certainly we don't necessarily provide a lot of services that we sell. And so when the president talks about transforming the economic structure, he wanted us to start moving up the complexity value chain, if you want to think about it, from an economic complexity perspective. The second thing he mentions in that paragraph is that we wanted to access innovative financial tools. He mentions things like green bonds, blue bonds, carbon credits. And you'll notice that a lot of those innovative financial tools help us get cheap funding, concessionary funding, things that the EIF deals with on a daily basis. This concessionary funding, this cheap funding, is useful to build assets that are going to help with combating climate change and reducing carbon content of various goods, of the economy in general. Okay, so now you're beginning to get a hint of why green hydrogen would be important, because hydrogen is commonly used today in various industries. The only reason it's green is because it's made from renewable energy and therefore helps to combat climate change. And if we pursued that, we're likely going to be able to unlock some of these green financial tools. And why was that important? We all know that Namibia already had quite a bit of debt. And so if we were going to attract capital, we wanted to attract cheap capital that was not going to increase our burden from a fiscal perspective. The last thing that he mentions, which is very important, is that he does want to inspire Namibians to start focusing on R&D, right? African-led research and development is what he was talking about. So one of the first things we did when we launched this whole green hydrogen agenda is we went straight to the universities and we asked them to form a national green hydrogen research institute. And today, whether it's NAST or UNAM, a lot of them are actually putting together curricula that are helping to train Namibians to understand the science behind this whole green hydrogen story. So at least now you're understanding what the bigger picture was from the president and how that ended up in HPP2. And now I'm going to use a simple diagram to start explaining how those words start to come together in what we had called in HPP2 the Southern Corridor Development Initiative, right? In this particular diagram, what you do see is you see some wind turbines and some solar panels there in the middle. And that is the renewable energy that Ludwig's really brings to the table. We can capture that wind and sun and use that electricity, and we transport it back to Ludwig's to that factory. And in that factory, we can then split water into its two components, hydrogen and oxygen. If you want to think about it very simply, you can shock the water and then get your hydrogen separately. You combine that hydrogen with nitrogen to make ammonia. Why? Because ammonia as a product, liquid ammonia, is a lot easier to trade. Because whatever natural resources you have, you still need to make it into a product that you can buy and sell. So once we had this product, we can then sell it to a market, and there you can see we want to export it to Europe. Okay, so that's the whole green hydrogen thing. Why is that relevant for the Namibian economy? This project is quite large, right? So once you start building such a large project, we're looking at employing a lot of people, so potentially 15,000 people during the construction stage. On top of that, we should be able to produce a lot of excess electricity. And we want to use that excess electricity at home, but also exporting it into the Southern African power pool. So there you can see we put a bubble there with Roshpina. What's happening in Roshpina? We refined zinc ore at Roshpina, and then we made zinc briquettes or ingots, and we would sell those. We stopped doing that. Why? Because it's a very energy-intensive industry. And we used to get almost 180 megawatts worth of electricity from South Africa to do that. But, of course, Eskom needs that more than we do. So we can't do zinc smelting in Namibia today because the electricity is too expensive. Once you start getting excess electricity, some of that coming from renewable energy, you can restart this whole industry as well. So Vedanta, for example, is looking at restarting this particular plant and even restarting a mine in Namibia where they can access up to 100,000 tons of zinc ore. So now already for your economy, there are two new things you're doing. A, you're exporting ammonia. B, you're beginning to mine zinc, but you're adding value to that zinc at home, which is what we always want to do in Namibia, right? Add value to our product. So now you take your zinc, you use your electricity, you smelt zinc ingots, and you're now exporting two different products from the same region, predominantly because you're beginning to harness that renewable electricity. And then, of course, you're now beginning to export more than just ammonia and zinc. Now you're also exporting electricity into the Southern African power pool, where at the moment we're importing a lot of electricity into the Southern African power pool. So the green hydrogen agenda was really not just for the molecule green hydrogen, it was to help set up this Southern Corridor Development Initiative, which of course begins to finance a complementary portfolio of interrelated infrastructure assets that essentially begin to help Namibia sell a diversified portfolio of goods and services. Other things will have to be developed, and I'll show you that in a second. Very important for Namibia to know, you see us there on the map, the size of those blue bubbles is how big our project is. It's very big here at home, but as you can see globally, it's not the biggest hydrogen project at all. Why is that important for us to know? It's a very competitive industry, and we're going to have to move with very dynamic legislation, and we're going to have to make sure that we're not looking to be too greedy early on. We're going to have to be competitive and compete with Chile, Australia, Oman, Saudi Arabia. All those guys are trying to do the same thing we're doing. So that just means we're going to have to put our best foot forward. What is this? On that other diagram I had, there was a port that we would have to develop. If you look on the bottom left-hand side of this presentation, it says RH Basin. That's Robert Harbor. That is the existing Lüderitz port. That big one there in the middle is a new port terminal that we would have to develop. So that now already begins to give you an idea that just because of this green hydrogen, now you're already beginning to build a much larger, much more dynamic asset such as this port. And if you look there on the left-hand side with the legend, you can see all the different commodities that we would be looking to export through this port, which includes things like the zinc I was talking about. Potentially, you've got on there as well manganese that would come from South Africa, etc. And so you can again go back to the president's diagram where he was saying, we want to change the nature of our economy. You can see with this one asset, we could be exporting 2 to 3 different commodities. And then of course, importantly, and we'll get there as well, this particular diagram is something very special. Not everyone has seen this, so maybe you guys are the first to see it on a public forum for a while. But we do know that Lüderitz will have all of this excess electricity. And we know that in the world today, there's a big demand for goods with low carbon content. So if we can capture all of this low carbon electricity and start to create green industrial zones, that's the real sort of long-term goal of ours, we can start to redesign the town of Lüderitz to host multiple new industries that are energy intensive and they're looking for cheap clean energy. Or they're looking also for cheap available hydrogen. Examples, pig iron. You take iron ore, you reduce it using hydrogen instead of using coal like they used before, and you can make pig iron, which is an ingredient to smelt, to actually make steel. So that's one new industry we could attract. You could attract fertilizer manufacturing industries here as well, because of course ammonia is a big input into fertilizer. You could also attract other energy-intensive industries like aluminium smelting. Importantly as well, of course there's oil and gas 300 kilometers off the coast of Lüderitz, they're also potentially looking to integrate some of their business model into this business model. Hydrogen can be used to refine oil, but similarly, you might be able to make low carbon content synthetic fuels that can be used to power some of the oil mining assets, and that could reduce the carbon content of the oil as well. So all of these potential new synergies that come about by having an energy-intense industry is what we're going to be thinking about here with Lüderitz. You can see they're thinking of redesigning the CBD, moving it out. There's some industrial zones here that will be created that could host, for example, green steel facilities, etc. This is very high level, right? And I've got 2 minutes. Why am I showing you this? I'm trying to show you this to help people realize that it's not about green hydrogen. It's about accelerating the economic transformation and the industrialization of Namibia. Okay, so that's the bigger picture. How do we get locals involved? This was my biggest mandate today, was to come and say, but what am I? I'm an SME, how do I get involved? We launched this SDD framework yesterday in Kidmanswood. The focus on this was to say, when government was engaging Hyphen to build this project, we said, we understand the project is big etc, but we want our local people to be involved. So we carved out a few things. A, the employment, there's a target for 90% of those jobs to be Namibian. In terms of local procurement, we have a 30% target for local procurement. That project is about 200 billion Namibian dollars, 30% of that is 60 billion Namibian dollars. If you do 2 or 3 multiplier on that, you're looking at almost 180 billion. It's a big number. Key thing here is, you see employment and skills development. Jobs, yes, skills development, training, right? The type of jobs you'd be needed to do this are as complex as mechanical, electrical engineering, and chemical engineering, to as simple as artisans, drivers, HR people, health and safety. So there will be some skills development, especially in the vocational area, that will need to get done in order to ensure that there are enough Namibians to get employed there. But similarly, local procurement now means buying goods and services from local businesses here. Whether you're as big as ONL and Putkowitz, or you're a small SME, whether you're providing food, construction services, logistics, all of that is going to be needed. And what we're going to do is we're going to be conducting these baseline studies to go into the Namibian economy and say, look, this is Hyphen's process, and these are all the goods and services that they'll require, and then we'll go test the market and say, which of these goods and services can be sourced in Namibia, which of these are already sourced, which could start, and what do we need to do to support those SMEs to start, for example, right? So that's a process we're going to be doing for the next 12 months, and we launched that process last night, yesterday. And then the supplementary infrastructure, very important. So that's the roads, the housing that you'll need to build to house 15,000 people between Aus and Lüderitz, right? If you think about that alone, 15,000 houses, construction, again, put that on a multiplier effect, these are massive potential needle movers for our economy. CSI is important, that's of course the philanthropy that's involved. I'll try and finish real quick. That's the project, the industry, the industrialization. How do you fund this? We've studied this concept of an SDG Namibia 1 fund. I actually saw asset managers were invited to this forum. I have my ex-colleague there, Tugieni, who used to be an investment analyst. I found that to be super funny. But this SDG Namibia 1 fund is an infrastructure fund that will essentially attract capital with fund managers and then deploy that capital into various projects in Namibia. So you've got there Hyphen as an example of the first project, but it could also invest in hydrogen pipelines, some of the port facilities, common user infrastructure, etc. Where would the money come from? A plethora of different investors, and this is where this is super cool. So yet tomorrow, not tomorrow, later on today, Benedict then will talk about an integrated national financing framework. This is what it looks like in practice. It's the government going to look for blended financing, different types of money that come from different types of investors. Some have very developmental agenda, so they're willing to give you very cheap money, some of those innovative financial tools. Some just want to give you normal debt, other normal equity. And we're going to put that in this vehicle, and then we're going to deploy that into the projects. Very important thing here, this vehicle provides an opportunity for local pension funds to actually invest in this vehicle and start investing in projects here in Namibia. Last thing that's very important, this is on a project financing perspective. So this doesn't sit on the government balance sheet. It has limited recourse over the assets that it will fund. Amazing opportunity. We've got 40 million euros here from the Dutch. We're raising another 60 million this year. This is a game changer, both for Namibia and a few. South Africa is also trying to do this now, by the way. The good thing here is Namibians now begin to participate in this economy in two ways. Building the project, but also financing it, using our own pension funds so that we can start enjoying economic returns as well. Did I make 6 minutes? Okay, I didn't make 6 minutes. Okay, enjoy it.